Hello, good afternoon. My name is Daniel Roberts, and I'm the curator of the silverware exhibition here at the Liang Yi Museum. Thank you so much for coming to the second of our three-part series on the curators here. And today we have two curators, namely Ulanda Blair, who is the curator of moving images at M+. And we have Dr. Chung, who is the curator of Videotage. Ulanda and Kyle have prepared a slideshow, which Ulanda is going to start to explain a little bit about what she does and how she projects it.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Thanks everybody for coming out today in the rain. It's really nice to have such a big audience. Yes, so as Daniel mentioned, I'm working for M+. Hopefully some of my visitors, they're just about to celebrate our 1 year anniversary on the 12th of November. But for those of you that haven't come, M+ is a global museum, so we have a collection, our programs are international ones. We have a distinctive voice that reflects the uniqueness of our time and place within an Asian context, and we're collecting, exhibiting and interpreting visual culture of the 20th and 21st centuries. So our collection and programs roughly span around 1950 to the present, and we are a museum of visual culture. It's a term that we like to interrogate quite a lot, both with our audiences and internally, but we have three major disciplines: visual art, design and architecture, and moving image. As Daniel mentioned, the curator of moving image, I came to Hong Kong 6 years ago to join M+ and to help set up the spaces and start building the collection. As a curator of moving image, I work across many different spaces at M+. Of course, the galleries, we have over 15,000 square metres of galleries, 33 galleries. And the moving image can be seen throughout the gallery spaces. I work, all of us work in a very interdisciplinary way, so you'll see moving images in our design and architecture exhibitions, in our visual art exhibitions. So it's a very rich and productive cross-disciplinary conversation. We have this space on the top left, so top right, called the Videotage. That's a space where we show our single-channel moving image collection as a play-on-demand facility. So audiences can come in, it's free, and there's over 250 works that you can kind of browse our collection, look at, search the collection through different ways. Maybe you've only got 5 minutes, you've got 40 minutes, you can search how much time you've got, you can search by geographies, by artists, by eras, lots of things. So part of that space we also have what's called an interactive media room, and that's just for one person at a time. And that's a space where we show mostly virtual reality and artistic video games. And actually, Kyle even curated a work by Victor a few months ago, which was a video game. Of course, we have cinemas. We have 3 cinemas, 180 seats, 60 and 40 seat cinema. The outside of our building, the facade, is actually a moving image platform. So between 6 and 11, we show moving images on the exterior of the building. And then we also have this space called the Grand Stair, which is a big staircase that seats up to 500 people, and it has a big enormous LED screen at the base of the stairs. And Kyle and I were just discussing this very fun event that we held last Friday night, which was called Game Atlas, and it was a showcase of independent video games with independent video game designers come and showcase their work, and the audience was able to play those games and have an amazing turnout. We were just talking about how there seems to be this real hunger within the games community for these kind of experiences. So in terms of the moving image collection, somebody that's really hugely important to our collection is Liang Yi. He's widely considered to be the inventor of video art, somebody who really pioneered the use of technology and art and technology. So when we look at our moving image collection, we often sort of talk about the development of the form with the experiments of Liang Yi. But then if we're going to be kind of more purist about digital art, digital moving image, artworks that's made with a computer and software with computer-based tools. We have works by Chinese artist Chow Fei, whose R&B City is a very important work which he made within the virtual world of of Second Life, in the sort of era just before the Beijing Olympics. Then Bo is another important Chinese artist whose Long March Restart project is again an interactive game-based work. John Curators makes simulations, so he's using video game technology to create works in real time, images in real time, that change in real time. We've got this work, Bag of Beliefs, Bob Chung on display at the moment. He's actually made with AI. He's an artificial life form. The audience can use an app and give him offerings and actually influence the way that he behaves. Paul Chan's Hong Kong-born American-based artist who's also been very important in the early years of digital art. And quite important, I say quite important, very important collection that we have is the work of Young Age Champion the Industries. A few years ago, we acquired the entire collection of their work, everything that they've ever made since they formed in 1997. And we have this unique relationship where every 6 months we receive a hard drive by donation from the artists with every work that they've made over that six-month period, and we'll continue to receive those donations for as long as the artists are active. And Young Age Champion Industries are a collaborative duo based in Seoul, and they were some of the first artists to use the internet as an exhibition space, essentially, pioneers of net art. We have a work by Liang Yi Museum, VR work, and in early next year we'll be showing a work by the Hong Kong artist Alan Huang, which is another game-based work. Sorry, play. Looking beyond the moving image, in our digital collection, we also own the very first emojis. So the Docomo designed emojis from 1998. You can see they're quite rudimentary looking compared to what we use today. We also have, also very interested in this kind of interdisciplinary conversations, interested in the way that artists work in maybe more traditional art forms, visual art and painting, photography and sculpture are influenced by digital technologies and using the languages and materials of the digital world. I mentioned the facade. This work, Touch for Luck, was the very first commission that we made for that space. It's by the Dutch collective Monica. And again, this is an interactive work, brass-based work. We hope to bring it back early, probably Chinese New Year next year. Audiences which essentially come together and use the facade as a digital meeting place, using their mobile phones to interact. Another initiative that we've been working on over the past 4 years is commissioning works, especially for our website. Again, interactive works, and we're just starting to explore how we might be able to collect those as well and ensure their preservation into the future. I mentioned Young Age Champion Industries, and it's just explain, sorry, the relationship we have with them. But this was a work that we commissioned for our focus gallery, which was one of the first video sculptures that they've made. And coming up in December, that's the reason I put that in, I was trying to remember. So we're into the last few weeks of Brisbane Light TV, so this will be replaced by a work by people that some people may know as the NFT artist. So we're looking at a work by him called Human One in the middle of December. And another thing I just wanted to mention is we're interested in digital culture more broadly. So artists that may not necessarily be using digital materials or the language of digital languages, but actually just interested in the impact of digital technology on society and on humanity. And I'm curating a program called The Cinemas, 6 screenings in February and March, called Techno-Sapiens, which is really looking at the intersection of technology and humanity. So yeah, that's just a quick kind of introduction to MPAS and its recent engagement with the digital work of our collections and programs.
That's me. Hello, thank you. So, hi everyone, I'm Kyle, and I am a curator and recently appointed chairperson of Videotage. And but I'm also, outside of the Videotage context, I am an independent curator. And kind of in an independent capacity, I thought, while not representing an organization, I put together some images of my past exhibitions, and hopefully in a few minutes I'll tell you my life story. So this was one of the first exhibitions I've done when I lived in London, where I was trained as a curator in Chelsea College of Arts with David Boza and Dr. Smith, who are very traditional kind of 1970s, 1960s contemporary art curator, conceptual art curator in London, and I wouldn't say they know very well about curating media art, so I thought my kind of educational background kind of is a weird combination of traditional formats or curatorial approach with kind of accompanied with my lifetime interest in working with media art. That's kind of what my practice, I would say, is all about. So for this particular exhibition, I would say kind of shows my kind of context-driven, experience-oriented curatorial methods for exhibition making. And this particular exhibition is it was in an art space called The Mall in 2014, called Bright Shadow, and it was a single-channel media artworks and media installations on the topic of treating the screen, whether that mobile phone screen or a smartphone screen, projection screen, other kind of screen, treating that kind of screen culture as the shadow, or in the Plato's cave, the Plato's allegory of the cave, and kind of building on, using that as a basis to build on the beauty curatorial framework of this exhibition. And in my, I would say, in my time making exhibitions in Europe, this was one of the exhibitions I did working with individual artists. And this exhibition is from 2015, a solo exhibition by Hong Kong artist Carly Chan in an art space in Berlin called Smack. So, and then moving to Hong Kong in 2016,
this was one of the first exhibitions I've done since I moved back. The ICEA, International Symposium of Electronic Arts, at the City University of Hong Kong Creative Media Center here, and along with 3 other venues, including the Innovation Tower in Polytechnic University, and connecting space by Zurich University of the Arts in Hong Kong, and HKU Museum. And throughout all different venues, we featured in this exhibition over 80 artworks. And it was for ICEA, which was a symposium, so the curatorial framework actually followed the conference themes, touching on important topics in tech, such as surveillance, and cybersecurity, digital heritage, robot sex, and crypto finance, that kind of important issues in tech. And then, kind of shortly after the ICN exhibition, I started working with Videotage, for those who are familiar with Videotage, which is a non-profit media organization in Hong Kong, based in Catford Depot. And this was the first exhibition, my first collaboration with Videotage in 2017 in the Chi Payment Art Space, where I recognized that Chung Station outside of the art space. And this was called One World Exposition 2.1 #Life for Life. And it was an exhibition, I think we have guessed the video. It was an exhibition that, my video crashed your arm slides. It's okay, it's okay. It was an exhibition, I would say, of experimental spirit, where we considered the space or the landscape of social media as part of the preface for within our curatorial framework for the exhibition. Yours. And try the video again. Yes. Oh, it's working. Right. And particularly targeting younger generation of exhibition goers, and including like kind of considering the social space of social media as part of the curatorial practice, and extending the context of our works and the context of the exhibition into the social media landscape. So through the kind of selection of artworks and the context of the artworks and the kind of curatorial method of exhibition design, we wanted to actually encourage the audience to kind of interpret artworks through social media. Another kind of aspect of our curatorial practice, I would say, people don't normally notice, is that I actually am very interested in other than working with digital media artworks and that kind of ethereal materials. I love working with archives, and there's not really been that many opportunities throughout in my CV in the past few years to get to work with archival materials. I mean, that vision cycle of the more media exhibitions I've done, the more media exhibitions people ask me to do. So for archival materials, I kind of took this opportunity for in working with NPAP for an exhibition in 2018 in an art space in Singapore called 1961. And I took the opportunity to show iconic artworks by NPAP, a Hong Kong media pioneer, iconic artworks from the 80s and 90s, alongside archival materials in the archive of Videotage, including the correspondence and kind of the facts documents you can see in the middle. That's the first proposal from Videotage to the Hong Kong Arts Development Council in 1996. But what's fascinating is this particular exhibit on the right, which is, if I didn't mention, Alan Howard is one of the founders of Videotage about 36 years ago. And also the current artistic director of Microwave Media Festival, which with the latest iteration opened last Friday. And here we are looking at a poster and a festival program leaflet from the first Microwave Festival. And at the same time also annotated by Tony Lam, who's now the director of Hong Kong Arts Centre, and back then, for the first iteration of Microwave Festival, she was the, I think, one of the producers or project managers for Microwave Festival. Very great exhibits. And without going really into details, I would say this exhibition I did with Tobias Clark in Tokyo in 2018. It was an exhibition that showcased techniques in media arts or craftsmanship in media arts. And I just wanted to show this exhibition of kind of putting a low mask at the beginning of a media exhibition where everyone, all the audience, was just expecting to see digital content, and we put this no mask, a traditional or traditional Japanese no performance, highlighting the craftsmanship, the importance of craftsmanship, not just in photo-orientation, but in the very same kind of spirit that should also be kind of emphasized in media arts as well, and of course speaker partnership alongside. Also at the entrance of the exhibition is iconic artwork King, Candle TV by Andrew Pai. I think it's that. And then I think finally, one of the most recent projects I've done was the Videotage, is this Live Your Body virtual catatonic residency on Minecraft. And I've been working with kind of using game platforms as creative platforms for artists, particularly who might not be very familiar with that. We don't normally work with digital materials. And for this particular project, I invited artists such as Rob Kane to bring artworks on this video game Minecraft. And as part of the dissemination program, we also kind of invited the artists in residency, the artists who were actually participating in these projects, to do kind of virtual play dates with me, and through these play dates we had a conversation about the experience working on Minecraft, this virtual space. And this was, and then we've run this programs, residency program, for a couple of times already, I think, and it's 6 editions, and this was the 2nd edition. We invited and also Videotage, UK artist and Hong Kong artist Angela Su for kind of doing this residency together, occupying the virtual space together for a month to develop artworks on Minecraft. And I think this is the last slide. There it is. This was the same in your body platform of Minecraft for the 4th edition, you find that Peter Nelson, an Australian artist too, create these tricks, or AI tricks, or 3D models considered by AIS tricks as a kind of a 4th edition of an installation in the virtual platform on Videotage. That's September 2021. I think that's the last. Right, there it is. That's all my research projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. That was fascinating. We put together some questions for you. First, what is digital art and how did you originally become involved?
So, if I'm going to give a purist response, I suppose I would say that digital art is art that's been made with software or computer-based tools. However, I mentioned in my presentation we've got quite a few digital platforms which digital technology has enabled us to show works that were originally made on celluloid film to be digitised and now we can show them in the media set, for example, where you can play them on demand or we can put them on the facade or the exterior of the building. So, there's digital technology has enabled this transformation of more traditional materials, but I suppose digital art in its purest sense would be, as I say, there are works in which the artists are using software, computer software and computer tools. That's how I got involved. Like Kyle, I come from an art history, a visual art background. I was working for galleries and festivals in Australia in my early career, and then over time just began to kind of specialise more and more, and began working at the Australian Centre for the Moving Image in Melbourne, also known as ACME, and there I was working across film, television, contemporary art and digital culture. And yeah, I was working with ACME for 5 years and then as a French trainer, came years ago, in the moving image. So as a moving image curator at M+, digital art is just one facet of my curatorial practice, my remit. I look after film and animation, documentary, video art, video sculpture, as well as digital.
I would say the definition of digital art, there are the countless ways of approaching this definition. But the most straightforward one, I would say, probably is digital art, like either digital materials, or like digital art in the form of digital materials, or it has once been in digital forms, perhaps through the process of art making by the artist, having gone through the process of being treated digitally, or kind of digital form, upon digital materials that's not being materialized or physicalized. That there's all these different methods of finding it. And also, I would say there's a evolving aspect to the term digital art that I would say probably the kind of digital art that was the kind of artworks that were considered digital artworks probably in the 80s and 90s. They would be quite different than what we are calling digital art now. So I'm sure 20 years from now, 50 years from now, we will have a different definition of digital art. The kind of artworks I work with, in my curatorial practice, I like to frame this definition as broadly as possible, so that, like going back to what I was saying, in my exhibitions, most of the time, it's all context driven or experience oriented. So it's not the definition of visual art is often like the question of it is often not the most important question. What the experience of the audience in the exhibition is that's most important.
Thank you so much. Why is digital art important? And who you say is your main audience?
I guess our lives are inextricably impacted by digital technology, by the internet and by network technologies. And for that reason, I guess digital art is important because artists are responding to the language, the material, and the context of our time. I guess that's essentially why I think digital art is important. And the second part of the question was?
Who's your main audience?
My main audience. M+'s main audience for digital art, I think, are what we call digital natives, people that were born, I guess, in the age of the internet, in which these technologies are very much second nature. They're definitely our biggest audience, and as I mentioned before, even Friday night had this enormous enthusiastic audience for our game night, and that's very much a young audience. Whereas many museums around the world are really trying to court this kind of younger audience, the next generation of art and culture aficionados. And plus, we do find our audience is much, much younger than most major museums around the world. So that in our first year, and that's not just, of course, because of showing digital art, but we are finding that our audience is much younger than the typical audience around the world. But beyond that, I think we can say the rise of NFTs. We see, investors, for example, for better or for worse. Yeah, we've got other people that may not have engaged with the art world or kind of contemporary creative culture in the past, suddenly finding themselves more engaged in digital art. So we are seeing kind of sort of new audiences emerging.
Sorry, what's the first question?
Why is digital art important? Who are your main audience?
Why is it important? I guess I answer two questions at the same time. The audience, if we look at the audience today, it's very different from perhaps audience 50 years ago. From the perspective of curatorial practice, when your audience changes, your curatorial approach changes as well. And I feel like we should expect the kind of curatorial approach for perhaps the same exhibition or the same exhibits that even for the same collection, the way to curate an exhibition today, because of the evolving concept of the audience, it should be a different approach than working with the same exhibits, working with the same collection. It should be a very different approach 50 years ago. And in the sense that the audience now is so much familiar, so much more comfortable and confident with digital materials that our smartphone can take our life. When technology is so close to our daily life and it has so many impact on how we live with materials, that relationship changes along with the development of technologies. And that's why that's what interests me most about working with media arts or digital materials, is that it has that mediated quality, and it has that special way of using the digital material, or using the digital media to communicate with the audience, in a way that they are familiar with. I was talking about in one of my exhibitions, working on important issues in tech, such as perhaps surveillance. And when you want to work with artworks on the topic of surveillance, and perhaps artworks related to how smartphone or Google or these big tech sometimes has the element of the business model of surveillance. What's more intimate to communicate that kind of important topics with the audience than actually working with artworks using the very medium of smartphones. So that kind of digital media, I think, is most effective when we're talking about these kind of issues. And going back to your two questions, I would say, yeah, that's why media as an art form is important. It has that special way of communicating with our contemporary audience.
Great, thank you so much. One last question. How do you curate digital art, and what challenges do you face? And how do you guarantee its longevity in your collections? I guess you have a huge lot of much older pieces where the technology maybe is becoming sort of outdated or not great use anymore. Do you have a process in which you transfer all of that data to new forms of programs?
Okay, so the first question is how do we curate digital art? I guess I curate digital art in quite a similar way to other art forms. When selecting works, digital art, I'm looking at the way that this work speaks, like what kind of message is it sending? What is the artist's what does the work have to offer to a broader conversation? How might the artist be pushing kind of conventional forms or languages? How might they be using digital materials in a new and interesting way? How does that work with digital art communicate? What happens when you put that work in the vicinity of another artwork, whether that's digital or not? I'm just interested in the way that objects speak. So it doesn't matter really, whether or not the work is digital or not. I'm interested in what that object can offer an audience. And in terms of the challenges, as we've identified already, Daniel, technology is definitely one of the biggest challenges, if not the biggest challenge to collecting and presenting digital art. We have at M+ a committee, a time-based media committee, which is very cross-departmental. It has conservators, it has people from our IT department, it has our technicians, curators, registrars, people in rights and reproduction. There are so many, the digital art is kind of fraught with challenges. And it's really important that we have this kind of cross-departmental collaboration and problem solving to ensure not only that we can ensure the longevity of these objects, but also to ensure that we're saving art history. When these objects are disappearing as soon as they're presented, then that's like a huge loss to art history, and as a museum that's so important. That's what we're, our modus operandi. We need to be telling important histories of an art form. We have a very talented conservation team. I actually, over the last few days, have been hosting media industries from Seoul. And earlier this morning, we were having a meeting with our conservators talking about, the challenges in that so much of their past work was made using Flash software, Adobe Flash, which no longer has been phased out. So, we're constantly talking to the artists about what their sort of levels of comfort with our interventions, what is the kind of integrity of their work, what needs to stay as we kind of look at different tactics, different strategies in which to preserve their art. Of course, that's a lot easier today when the artists are living, and I'm not going to be around forever, and nor are the artists, so it's really important that we also gather a lot of documentation, so as we're acquiring works and exhibiting works, we're just having a lot of interviews, a lot of questionnaires, really kind of understanding the artist's intention for the work, how they make the work, what the parameters of the work are, so that we can make the most kind of judicious decisions about the best way to preserve them into the future. Of course, it's hard to know where technology is going to go, but the very least we can do is understand the core of the artist's core intentions for the work and understand what they are and not comfortable with.
I don't really have anything to add on to that, and also the sense that you covered quite the topic quite comprehensively. I suppose I could add one point from the perspective of exhibition making, that especially when we're working with interactive media, I've used the example of the Minecraft projects I showed earlier. The learning curve for the audience, and also something that in Minecraft example for the artists participating in our project as well. The learning curve is something I would say quite different from, as a challenge, quite different from working with traditional media. In the Minecraft example, the gaming environment, or just the control of navigating through the virtual environment, that's something for perhaps the younger generation of artists or the audience, that's something really intuitive. Something that, just a few buttons of the arrows navigating through a virtual space. That's something very intuitive. That's something, it's a very short learning curve, very steep and short learning curve that for on my part, it's very easy to control the navigate, to be able to get through the learning curve and decide where the outputs. For the type of audience who perhaps are less familiar with navigating through a virtual space, or perhaps with less kind of not very experienced in gaming or game control, that actually takes a long time for them to get used to. That's quite a challenge for making exhibitions for perhaps general public. That's why kind of based on the medium itself, for example, the Minecraft game, that actually by nature isolates or can exclude quite a large part of the landscape of general public as the audience of the other projects. And kind of this kind of learning curve, this kind of consideration that one as a curator to make an exhibition with interactive media artworks, that's something that I would say probably kind of not necessarily something that curator working with traditional media would need to worry about.
Thank you. Very interesting answer. Actually, just out of interest, where would you see, as you mentioned, that there are generational differences between how people interpret, for example, Minecraft, navigating digital art exhibitions. How do you see it changing in both the short term very long term. See anything coming up that you think might actually influence what you're working on now?
I had an interesting conversation with an artist a couple of weeks ago. I mentioned that some of our online commissions, our interactive works online, we're looking at trying to session into our collection, and one of those artists is a Shanghai, New York based artist, Liang Yi, and I was doing what we often do, having a very in-depth discussion about what she is and isn't comfortable with in terms of our treatment of her work. And she said to me, I'm happy with A, B, and C. You know, you can treat my work this way until the internet doesn't exist. And I sort of had to stop for a minute. She's like, well, you know, the internet hasn't been around forever. And that was, for me, like, quite a revelation. I suddenly thought, yeah, wow, what's going to happen after the internet? And she was like, I don't care what happens to my work after the internet doesn't exist. My work was made for the internet. That's as long as my work should exist. So I don't know if that answers your question really. I think a lot of the hardware that we experience digital art on will become lighter and more portable. I think we're seeing this with things like VR, but maybe that's something we can in the short term. I think it's the way that these technology companies are kind of headed. The sort of less cumbersome technology is. Maybe that's kind of their aspiration. But long term, I don't know what's going to replace the internet.
Yeah, I would say actually, like, I mean, the questions of the short-term and long-term independence. In a similar way that probably not directly answering your questions, I would say, maybe from what you said earlier, it's the uncertainty that is so exciting. There is actually not anything that I wouldn't consider the uncertainty as a problem. And I suppose I have the liberty of not managing a collection. I have the liberty to be able to find this very exciting and not a problem. And actually, it's something that encourages me to experience even more in terms of experimental curatorial practice. And it's hard to say the long-term development of media arts because of going back to what I was talking about earlier, the evolving audience, the evolving technologies, and the evolving creative applications of the new technologies. So all these different kind of variables in the recipe of making media art or media art exhibitions. That's why I find it exciting.
Thank you so much. That was a great one. I'd like to invite our audience to ask some questions.
Yes, I have a question for Linda about the class. So I have been visited the class quite often, although I've been to Hong Kong only 6 months. So one question is about cinema. What is the strategies for you to do cinema archives, or how you would like to do it? I understand this month you were having movies about curating, so many movies. So I just want to go away to see how would you like to do cinema. What is strategies? And second question is about your media archive. I only have about 200 archives, so everything is related to Asia. I visited also. As an art lover, this is what, because I'm looking for methodology, which you don't have it. Yes, I know, but I think I want to ask what is the strategies for this perhaps, and also every year would you change? For example, the collections will be 80% will be remain and 20% will be new, or what is strategies? And I think as an audience, the museum as a part of education, which is very important, because I think Hong Kong audience are quite, we're all new. That's the way. So I think putting maybe 10% as a masterpiece, which I think is essential, because I look at inside, of course I'm not part of some of them, but I think, yeah, this, I just want to hear what, yeah, this, two.
Okay, so I'll start with the first two. So we have a cinema program. We run our cinemas from Wednesdays through to Sundays, and the majority of what we show in the cinemas is not our collection. So we have some programs that are from the M+ collection, but the majority of that is licensed material. Clearly, Spotlight is a collaboration with the French Film Festival. So we have partnerships with the Hong Kong International Film Festival, for example, and there's the French Film Festival. Cinemas, we've got many different strands. We have thematic programs, so I mentioned that in early 2023 there was a program called Techno-Sapiens, looking at the relationship between humanity and technology. We've got the Summer exhibition coming up, so we've got a cinema program looking at sort of taking different entry points into this harmless practice. So we've got an animation cinema program. We've got a program about the harmless circle in 1960s New York and 1980s Tokyo. We have we show recent art house cinema releases, so we've been showing Licorice Pizza, the film called Red Rocket. We show restored masterpieces. We show long form cinema. There's many different streams of every quarterly program, so every quarter these different streams will re-educate. We also have Hong Kong cinema, of course, is also an important area for us. In terms of collection, I mean, there's many different ways we can slice that pie, but we have various different thematic areas that we're interested in. The local Videotage, exploring by theme is one way. So we've got things like feminism, performance, and body art, ecology, sustainability, urbanism, diasporic art, migration, technology. There's many different ways. In terms of our geography, we in 2012 had this very important donation by Dr. Uli Sig. So that was 1,500 works of Greater China, so that's the core of our collection. And so that's also a very strong part of our moving image collection. And then we've built up on that. So if we look at geographically, most of our collection is from Hong Kong, China, East Asia, and then we sort of expand out. So we have works from all over the world. The majority of it is from our region. In terms of sort of time span, we are trying to tell a history of the development of moving image art. The earliest works we've got are from the 1950s, which were made without the use of a camera. Scratch animation, right up to the present, and again, we're making sure that we've got strong examples of everything from celluloid film to animation to video art, video installation, and digital art. So there's many different ways. The strategy is multi-pronged. And in terms of your last comment about masterpieces, I mean, I guess we feel that we are showing masterpieces. They might be, they're masterpieces often from our region that might not be as well known as a lot of the work shown in European or American museums, but that's our job is to give a platform to works from our region and ensure that there's still a dialogue with the rest of the world, of course, but yeah, so hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much. We have time for one more question.
So you both mentioned that a lot of your audience is predominantly young. So I wondered how many digital artists are trying to create intergenerational work that will be able to pensioners as well as the young, as well as to middle aged. How many digital artists are concerned about reaching a wider audience rather than just the young? And my other question is, as curators working in Hong Kong, do you feel that you program anything, or do you feel that there are certain constraints on your decision making in terms of the kind of work you can curate these days? So, two questions.
I'll start with a work that we're showing next month is a VR work by the master ink painter, Taiwanese master ink painter, Lucas Hong. So I'm in his 90s and is very interested in trying to reach new audiences and to bring his traditional audience to the other side. And yes, that's quite an amazing work where it places the audience almost within an ink painting. It's a very immersive, transcendental experience. And I guess that's an example of somebody that's not necessarily chasing a younger audience, but really interested in pushing a traditional art form into new territory. So that is maybe one way to think about your first question. The second question, I don't know, maybe it's me being paranoid, maybe that the elephant in the room, I guess, is maybe national security law, and as a movie curator, I think one thing that people maybe aren't so aware of is that every work that's shown, every work of moving image that's shown at the museum has to go through the Hong Kong Classifications Board, which is now also regulating obviously the national security law. So there are works that we can't show that have been rejected, and that's just the context that we're working in. And I think artists making work today, of course, local artists are very aware of that. So there are restrictions, and the new rules of engagement, and that has impacted my work, but not, thankfully, not in a too significant way yet.
I guess I'll answer the second question first, because I share this concern, and but my personal experience also I kind of realized, other than hard or visual censorship, that we as other cultural professionals in Hong Kong need to face these days. There's also the self-censorship that we encounter at many levels. At the level of working with artists, the artists may have certain concerns based on the political uncertainty in Hong Kong, and at the level of perhaps working with large institutions, or like small institutions like Videotage, or large institutions like West Island. There's all these bureaucracies that actually kind of perhaps sometimes before artworks or kind of exhibition materials being sent to the censorship court, there's already kind of more organic system to filter out certain content. that might be of concern. But for your first question, what was the first question? Right, younger audience. Yeah, it's, I would say when we were talking about the kind of programs that we do, kind of cater to the younger generation. I guess what we mean by that is that is the reality of the material actually attracts by nature a specific group of specific audience group. But then there's also the reality of, as curators, that it's a constant battle of trying to have a wide reach of the audience as well. That's the kind of thing. That's like every time when we program, I would say, every time when we set the target audience, that is part of the consideration. It's not that we just accept that and we move on. I'll give you a personal example. At the moment, I'm also working with West Carolina Plus on a media art festival. And when I curate the festival program, probably out of 9 projects in the festival program, there's at least like half of it that we will target a general public, a wider audience. Going back to my point earlier about learning curve, really, at least half of the program in the festival, half of the projects in the festival program, they require a very short learning curve. That just to give you one example, we're having Borealis, we're having northern lights above the art park in West Carolina. And that's the kind of digital materials, the digital artworks and media artworks that it doesn't really require. It's not interactive media when we expect general content having a picnic on the lawn in the art park in West Carolina, just up and enjoy that kind of public art. That's kind of, I always say as an example when I answer your question. To approach at least I would say half of the programs out of 10 programs that I would at least like to cater content for a wider audience. So that's I would say a constant struggle trying to have a wider reach.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating. On behalf of the Liang Yi, we'd really like to thank both Pat and Ulanda for all of their hard work, their magnificent presentations, and also allowing us to grill them with our questions. So thank you so much. This is the second of a series of 3 interviews with curators.